Hello, I'm Lucy Gray. It's day 23 of the US-Israel war with Iran, and over the next 10 or so minutes, we're bringing you our special programme. Let's start with some of the day's main developments. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calls on world leaders to join the war during a visit to an Israeli town struck by an Iranian missile. Israel's military claims that Iran's long-range missiles pose a threat to Europe. President Trump threatens to obliterate Iran's energy sites if Tehran doesn't fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours. But Iran says it will irreversibly destroy US-linked energy sites across the Middle East if its power plants are targeted. Right, let's bring you up to date with what we know. Israel is still reeling after missile strikes from Iran. Emergency services say more than 160 people have been injured in the southern Israeli towns of Dimona and Arad. It appears that the target of the Iranian attack was a nuclear facility 13 kilometers away from Dimona. Our correspondent Sebastian Usher has been to the site of the strike.
Beneath me here is the crater that was left by the direct hit that the Iranian missile made. It had a 200-meter blast range, so you can see the buildings, one brought down there, there's a kindergarten over there. These apartment buildings here stripped bare the facades by the force of the impact. Over here, you'll see another building that's been brought down. Essentially, this is major devastation near the nuclear facility of Dimona. That is why this area is being targeted, but it's civilians who are bearing the brunt of this. A number of casualties, huge damage, and a major physical, visible reminder of what the Iranian threat still means to the Israeli people.
Sebastian, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was visiting the sites of the strikes and had this message for world leaders.
What more proof do you need that this regime that threatens the entire world has to be stopped? Israel and the United States are working together for the entire world. And it's time to see the leaders of the rest of the countries join up. I'm happy to say that I can see some of them beginning to move in that direction, but more is needed. President Trump's call to have the international community confront this terrorist fanatic regime of zealots, that is a call not only for the security of America and the security of Israel, it's for the security of the entire world. And it's time for them to act.
Well, let's focus more on his comments to world leaders, because other European leaders have been brought into this conflict, with the Israeli military claiming Iran has missiles that can reach London, Paris or Berlin. You've been asking online, how far is the UK from Iran, and can Iran's missiles reach the UK? Let's look at some of that now. Iran has the most diverse arsenal of missiles in the Middle East. They're mostly short and medium range, designed to target other parts of the region, but they also have longer range ballistic missiles. Before the war started, the furthest they were believed to reach was just over 1,200 miles. That's about 2,000 kilometers. But after the attempt on Diego Garcia, Israel claimed that they can travel twice that far, potentially threatening parts of Europe. But the risk to London and the rest of the UK was all but dismissed by the British government.
Are you saying that it is not true that Iran could hit European capitals, Paris, Berlin, London?
I'm not aware of any assessment at all that they are even trying to target Europe, let alone that they could if they tried. But even if they did, we have the necessary military capability to defend this country.
Our political correspondent Joe Pike is here with me, and the UK is being drawn more and more into this war, isn't it?
Certainly that is the danger, Lucy, that UK government ministers are nervous about, and I think they're trying hard to guard against. And certainly those two missiles fired from Iran towards Diego Garcia, the UK-US military base in the Indian Ocean, is evidence that even though Keir Starmer argues that the UK's role is purely defensive, Iran has not interpreted it in that way. One interesting development in the last hour or so was the reposting by Donald Trump of a video, a comedy sketch from the Saturday Night Live UK programme last night, in which Keir Starmer is depicted as being scared of having a call with Donald Trump. I've asked Downing Street about that and they have not commented, though I'm sure they would argue, Lucy, that Donald Trump is not, Keir Starmer is not scared of Donald Trump because, of course, he said no to UK bases being used for offensive operations. The UK Prime Minister has also questioned the legality and the long-term plan. I think the real focus, though, of ministers at the moment and certainly tomorrow will be around the economic impact of all of this, certainly concerned about petrol prices, about energy prices and the wider economic impact. That's why senior government ministers and the Governor of the Bank of England will be meeting as part of COBRA, the UK government's emergency committee, tomorrow. And there seems to be, Lucy, increasing pressure for the UK government to help and to act.
OK, thanks very much, Joe Pike, our political correspondent. Well, President Trump threatened late on Saturday to obliterate Iranian power plants if the Strait of Hormuz is not opened within 48 hours. But Iran says the Strait of Hormuz will be completely closed if the US targets the country's energy infrastructure. The waterway is vital for global oil shipping, but boats passing through it have been targeted by the Iranian regime, causing global oil prices to rise. Well, let's go live to Washington now and speak to our North America correspondent, Simi Jola-Osho. So, Simi, just explain why President Trump has been making this ultimatum.
Well, the Strait of Hormuz is a central pressure point for President Trump. It's made it difficult for him to end this conflict on his own terms. It's exposed fractures between him and his allies. And it's a strategic choke point because the reality is a spike in Hormuz affects a fuel station here in Washington as much as it does one in Tokyo. So if Iran doesn't fully open the strait by the end of Monday, President Trump could, one, do nothing. Two, he could end this conflict. He could declare a victory. He's already said the US is close to meeting its latest objectives in this war, basically degrading Iran's military and nuclear capabilities. He didn't mention regime change. He didn't mention loosening Iran's grip over the strait. Or he could choose to escalate the war, so continue aerial attacks on Iran's shoreline, follow through on his threat by targeting Iran's energy infrastructure and introducing potentially ground forces to maybe seize Hague Island. We've heard reports that there are up to 5,000 American Marines and several American warships currently on their way to the Middle East. And we've also heard reports that the Department of Defense has detailed preparations for potential ground troop deployment. Now, President Trump on Thursday said he wouldn't deploy ground troops, but this wouldn't be the first time that we're hearing one thing from him and seeing a different reality on the ground.
Thanks, Simi. Simi Jola-Osho at Washington there for us. Well, other countries across the Gulf have been brought into this conflict. Iran has said it would destroy US-linked energy sites in the Gulf if its plants are targeted, as we've been mentioning. Let's go to Dubai now. Our correspondent Azadeh Mashiri is there. How are Gulf countries reacting to this, Azadeh?
Well, right now, Iran has said the strait is open to ships that aren't linked to their enemies and that coordinate with Tehran. But they have, as you've mentioned, threatened Gulf countries, threatened US energy sites in the Gulf, but also desalination facilities here. So water security a threat. So naturally, this has infuriated leaders here who are already angry, and they're worried about what the next few days will bring and how Iran will react. Now, Iran has shown that this grip it has on the Strait of Hormuz is its main card to play. Even when I spoke to one Iranian who wants the regime overthrown inside Iran, he said, well, this is the only leverage they have. I'm not surprised that they're reacting this way, and he was doubtful they would let that card go. And as far as Iran is concerned, by Donald Trump's threats, they've shown they have a very high pain tolerance. They, for decades, have allowed their economy as well as their people to suffer if it means the regime and what they call revolutionary values survive. We saw that as recently as January when they unleashed a brutal crackdown, killing thousands of protesters who were threatening regime change. They could also decide to call Donald Trump's bluff and hope that these threats will get Gulf leaders to urge Donald Trump to end this war. But not all Gulf countries see this the same way. Some of them are preaching diplomacy, like Oman. Some seem more open to a military response, like Saudi Arabia, while still leaving that door open for talks. How they react will also have a huge bearing on how this war unfolds.
Thank you. Azadeh Moshiri for us there in Dubai. Well, the impact of the war continues, but there seems no obvious end in sight. With me now is our World News correspondent, Joe Inwood. And Joe, we've had Donald Trump talking about winding things down. We've also heard about more US troops going to the region, and we're seeing these threats and counter threats continuing. People are asking online, who's actually winning this war? What's your assessment?
That is a very, very difficult question to answer, and in a way you have to establish how we define winning first. Now, in the most basic sense of who is destroying more of the other side's material, who is having more military effect, as it were, well, of course, the United States and Israel are vastly more powerful in a traditional, conventional sense than the Iranians. There was never going to be a competition in that kind of, if you look at it that way. But that isn't really how wars work. This isn't a symmetrical war, it's an asymmetrical war. And the Iranians have done many things which are allowing not only them to sort of survive militarily, but to continue to fight back long beyond people, the Americans said they would. So they've diversified their command structures, so when the Americans take out the top leadership, it doesn't matter nearly as much as it would do if you did that to a sort of traditional military structure. And as we saw from the missile attacks that we've seen in Israel yesterday, the attempt on Diego Garcia, the fact that they are still able to fire missiles after 3 weeks of continuous bombardment shows a sort of a resilience that maybe many people didn't think they would have. And the reason this matters is because what the Iranians need to do to win, if we're talking in those sort of simplistic terms, is to survive. This has been made existential for them. This has been made a matter of regime survival. So the longer they survive, the more they will look at this and go, we are winning. Because for the Americans, the longer it goes on, the greater the pain, the greater the economic cost, the greater the damage to their various alliances and their local allies. And so that's what we're seeing. The longer this continues, the more the ledger tips towards the Iranians. Of course, they're never going to win in a traditional military sense, but by their standards, by their measures, they would say they might be winning.
And the global impact continues, doesn't it? We've also had these comments from Israel saying that Iran has weapons now that can reach Europe, places like Paris, London. We've had the government here in the UK dismissing that today. What do you think?
Look, let's take this to, there's a few things to unpack here. When it comes to the Israelis saying this, they may be correct, but they also remember from an Israeli perspective, the more this gets widened out, the more the Europeans are brought in, there is an advantage to that. So I think their comment should be viewed in that context. When it comes to sitting here in London, sitting in Paris, sitting in Berlin, should we be concerned? I don't want to underplay the seriousness of this, but the short answer I would say is no. Even if the Iranians, this was the point the government was making, even if an Iranian missile, the ones we're talking about, could reach 4,000 kilometres, there are so many caveats to how that would happen. Firstly, at that range, it becomes wildly inaccurate. Within, I think, I was told, the accuracy of about 5 kilometres. The warhead has to be reduced. It would, of course, still be devastating if it hit London. But we are not talking about something where people should be, panicking or being upset. It's difficult to say exactly what this would be, but I would venture that most people do something every day which is statistically of a greater risk than the risk that anyone might face from this sort of thing. So yes, it's significant. Yes, it is something which we need to take seriously, but people really shouldn't be panicking or getting upset by this.
OK, your voice of calm. Thank you. Joe Inwood, our World News correspondent. And whether you're joining us on YouTube, TikTok, Sounds, radio or TV, thank you very much for joining us. And we'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the Iran war today.